She was a good wife, the kind of woman who kept the house spotless, showed up to every dinner party, and never once asked the questions she probably should have. She didn't go looking for the truth. The truth came for her. And when it did, it didn't just take her marriage. It also took her freedom. This is Mindy's story, a story that will absolutely break your heart. Welcome to Monday Love Hurts, where love is messy, emotions run deep, and heartbreak always leave a mark. Buckle up, today's story is about to begin. I'm going to tell you this from the beginning, because that's the only place where I am still recognizable to myself. My name is Mindy Calloway. I'm 52 years old. I have a bachelor degree in art history from the University of Georgia and a graduate certificate in nonprofit management that I've never fully used. I have 2 children, Nathan, who is 26 and lives in Chicago, and Sophie, who is 23 and was in her 2nd year of law school when all of this happened. I have a house in Buckhead, Atlanta, where I raised my 2 children over the last 20 years. And I haven't been inside since the night the police came to the door. I have a husband named Richard. I need to be careful when I say that last sentence. I still say have, because we are technically still married. The divorce proceedings stalled when the criminal case took over everything, and I haven't had the bandwidth to care about the paperwork. And Richard's attorneys advised him not to finalize anything while the appeal is still pending. So on paper, on the document that sits in the files of the Fulton County Clerk's office, I am still Mrs. Mindy Ann Calloway, wife of Dr. Richard James Calloway, cardiovascular surgeon, 41 years at Emory University Hospital. A man who once held open hearts in his hands and was trusted daily with the most fragile and essential thing a human body contains. I'm telling you this story from a room that is not in my house. I will leave it at that for now. I want to tell it in order, because the order is the only way it makes sense. And because if I start in the middle, if I start with the courtroom, or with Richard's face on the stand, or with a photograph they showed the jury, I will lose the thread entirely, and I need the thread. It's about all I have left. Richard and I met in 1993. I was 22, he was 26, and in his 2nd year of medical school at Emory, which meant he was tired all the time and intense in the way that people are intense when they're being remade by pressure. I was working at an art gallery in Midtown, the kind of gallery that sold prints to companies and occasionally showed real work by real artists. And he came in one Saturday afternoon looking for something for his apartment wall. He stood in front of a large abstract piece for a long time without speaking, and I finally asked if he needed help, and he said, "I'm trying to figure out if I actually like it, or if I just want to be the kind of person who likes it." I told him that was the most honest thing anyone had said in that gallery. We were married 4 years later. I want you to understand what 24 years of a marriage looks like from the inside. because I don't think people who haven't lived a long marriage fully understand the texture of it. It's not a single thing. It's 1,000 different things laid on top of each other. Some of them beautiful, some of them mundane, some of them quietly painful in ways you never address because you've both agreed, without saying so, not to look at them directly. Richard was a good husband in the ways that are easy to measure. He was present, mostly. He was generous, always. He was proud of me in the way that successful men are proud of their wives, which is both genuine and slightly proprietary. He was funny in private, in a dry, low-register way that only I knew about. He remembered things. He showed up. He also worked constantly. 70, 80 hours a week was normal. Cardiac surgery doesn't keep a schedule. The heart doesn't care that it's a Thursday evening or Saturday morning, or your daughter's recital. We had built our life around his absence as an organizing principle, which sounds bleak but genuinely wasn't, most of the time. I had my own life, my volunteer work, my friends, my community, my garden. I had learned years ago not to take the empty chair personally. That's the thing about a man who's always been partially absent. When the absence becomes complete, it takes longer to register. I found out on a Tuesday, October last year. I was picking up Richard's gray suit from the dry cleaner on Peachtree, the one he had worn to a conference in Dallas the month prior. I had dropped it off myself, and I was picking it up myself, because that's how things worked in our house. The dry cleaner, a small Korean-owned shop I had been using for 15 years, had done the usual good job. The suit was pressed and put in plastic and tucked into a breast pocket because the woman who ran the counter, Mrs. Kim, always returned items found in pockets rather than discarding them. Was a receipt. Not a business receipt, a restaurant receipt from a place called Alma Cocina in Buckhead, dated a Saturday in September when Richard had told me he was attending a medical conference in Houston. Table for two. A bottle of wine I recognized as expensive. The total was $540. The last 4 digits of the credit card matched Richard's personal card. Not our joint account, not his business card. I stood at the dry cleaner counter for a moment. My mind blank, my heart pounding in my chest, and my vision went blurry for a second. Mrs. Kim was looking at me. "Everything okay, Mrs. Calloway?" "Yes," I said. "Everything is fine." I drove home. I put the suit in Richard's closet. I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the receipt for a long time. Then I did the thing you're not supposed to do. The thing that opens a door you cannot close afterward. I opened Richard's laptop. I knew the password. We never had secrets about passwords, which now strikes me as either naive or deeply ironic. And I went through his email. It took me 20 minutes to find it, not because it was hidden well, but because I kept stopping, keep having to put my hands flat on the table and breathe. Because each thing I found led to the next thing, the way a loose thread in a sweater leads to the whole garment unraveling. Her name was Denise Farrow. She was 44 years old. She lived in a condominium in Sandy Springs, in a building I recognized because it was 10 minutes from our house, and I had driven past it 100 times. She was a pharmaceutical sales representative. She and Richard had been together for 6 years. 6 years. I want to pause on that number. Nathan had been 20 years old when it started. Sophie had been 17. Richard and I had celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary during those 6 years. We had taken a trip to Spain for that anniversary. 2 weeks, we stayed at a beautiful villa with a pool. I have photos from that trip on the wall of our hallway. Richard with his arm around me at a clifftop restaurant. We look happy. We were happy, or I was, which I now understand is not the same thing. 6 years. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs. I ran a bath and sat in it until the water went cold. And then I got out and put on my pajamas and lay on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling. Richard came home at 11:15. He came upstairs, showered, got into bed. He asked if I was asleep. I said yes, which is a kind of lie you can only tell someone who doesn't look at you carefully enough. I didn't confront him that night, or the next night, or the one after that. This decision, the decision not to speak, is the one I have replayed more than any other, more than the drive, more than the intersection, more than any choice I made in the weeks that followed. Because everything that came after grows directly from those weeks of silence. And I have asked myself 1,000 times whether if I had simply said something, the rest of it might have happened differently. I didn't sleep, not really, not for weeks. I want to be precise about this, not because it's my legal defense, though it became that, but because it was real and it was destroying me, and no one knew. I had always been a reasonable sleeper, 7 hours generally, occasionally 6 in high-stress periods, but nothing chronic. What happened after the dry cleaner was different. I would lie down and my mind would begin in the specific relentless way of a mind that has been given an unsolvable problem, cycling through images and calculations and questions with no answers. Every evening, Richard had worked late. Every conference, every emergency call, every Saturday morning he'd gone in early. Every time I hadn't asked for details because I'd been trained over 24 years not to need them. The math of it was unbearable. The sheer arithmetic of 6 years, the number of lies, the number of nights, the number of times I'd sat across from this man at dinner and believed I knew him. You start doing the calculations and you cannot stop. I was sleeping 3 hours a night, sometimes less. I was functional in the daytime. I'm a structured person, a routine person, and I kept to the routine the way you grip a railing when the stairs are icy. I got up, I exercised, I had lunch with friends. I made dinner. I sat across from Richard and watched his mouth move and listened to his voice and felt as though I was watching him through thick glass. I took Benadryl, I took melatonin, I took the low-dose Xanax my doctor had prescribed years ago for flying anxiety, which I almost never used. Nothing worked for long. The 3 a.m. ceiling was always there, and the questions were always there with it. I had an appointment with my doctor, Dr. Parrish, my GP, on the 3rd week. She asked the standard questions. I told her I was having trouble sleeping due to stress. She asked what kind of stress. I said, general. She prescribed a low-dose sleep aid, trazodone, 50 milligrams, and told me to follow up in 3 weeks. I filled the prescription. I took it twice. It made me feel foggy and heavy in a way that frightens me, so I stopped. I'm not trying to build a picture for you. I'm telling you what was true. There were no grand gestures of suffering, no dramatic scenes, no obvious signs. I was a 52-year-old woman lying in the dark 3 nights out of 4, carrying something enormous, completely alone. And I looked from the outside, completely fine. The accident happened on a Wednesday night in the 3rd week of November. I couldn't sleep. It was 2:20 in the morning. Richard was in bed. I could hear his breathing from the hallway. That deep, even rhythm that had once comforted me and now felt like an affront. I went downstairs. I sat in the kitchen. I made tea I didn't drink. I thought about driving. I know how this sounds now. I know how every piece of this sounds when you arrange it against what happened. But the drive wasn't a plan. It was what I had done before, twice in those weeks. Late-night drives through quiet Atlanta streets, because movement was the only thing that quieted the cycling. I had driven to Chastain Park and back. I had driven down West Paces Ferry Road in the dark, past the lit windows of big houses, just to have somewhere to go. The night I got into my car, my black Mercedes GLE, the one Richard had bought me for my 50th birthday, and I drove. I've reconstructed the timeline from the police report and my own fragmented memory. I drove for approximately 40 minutes. I was on Roseville Road, heading back toward Buckhead, approaching the intersection with Wyuka Road at approximately 3:15 a.m. The light was green. I was in the left lane. I fell asleep. Not for long. The experts later said microsleep episodes last between 1 and 30 seconds. Mine was long enough. I ran the green light, which had changed to red during the microsleep, which I didn't see, and struck a vehicle crossing the intersection from Wyuka, a silver Honda Civic. The impact was on the driver's side door at approximately 40 miles per hour. I woke to the sound. There are no words for a sound like that at 3 in the morning when you don't know what it is yet. It takes a second to understand what you've done. The second is endless. I stopped the car. I got out. I wasn't injured. Airbag deployment, minor bruising, nothing more. I went to the other car. The driver was a woman. She was conscious, but badly injured. She was making sounds, not words, and her door was caved in. I called 911 immediately. I stayed with her. I held her hand through the broken window because it seemed like the only thing to do. I told her help was coming. I don't know if she heard me. She died at Piedmont Hospital at 5:45 a.m. Blunt force trauma and internal hemorrhage from the impact. Her name. I was told by the attending officer at the hospital after I had given my statement and submitted a sobriety testing, which I passed, I want to be clear, was Denise Farrow. I need you to understand what the next 60 seconds felt like when I heard that name. I was sitting in a hospital waiting area in my pajamas with a foil emergency blanket around my shoulders and a cup of coffee someone had given me that I hadn't touched. The officer, a young man, I don't remember his name, was reading from a form. He said the name. He kept talking. I stopped hearing him. The woman I had struck was Denise Farrow, Richard's Denise Farrow, the woman who had been sleeping with my husband for 6 years, the woman whose email I had read in my kitchen, whose name I had Googled at 2 a.m, whose condominium building I could see from Roseville Road on a clear day. She had been driving home at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday that night in November. I don't know from where. I don't know if she was coming from somewhere that involved Richard. I don't know, and I will never know. And the not knowing is its own specific torment. I sat in that waiting room and I said nothing. Not because I was calculating, but because I had gone somewhere inside myself that words couldn't reach. A hospital social worker sat with me for a while. She was kind. I don't remember what she said. The charges came quickly. In Georgia, causing a fatality through criminal negligence while operating a vehicle is vehicular homicide in the second degree. A felony carrying up to 15 years. The Fulton County District Attorney's Office filed that charge within 72 hours. I retained an attorney, Stephen Park, a criminal defense attorney in Atlanta with a reputation I trusted, recommended by the only person I told everything to in those first days, which was my daughter, Sophie. Sophie drove down from law school the morning after the accident, and she sat with me in the living room of that Buckhead house, and I told her everything. The dry cleaner receipt, the laptop, the 3 weeks of silence, the 6 years, the drive. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Mom, you cannot talk to anyone without an attorney present. Not the police, not Dad, no one." Stephen Park was 50, smart, experienced in exactly this kind of case. He sat across from me in his office 2 days after the accident and laid out the landscape plainly. "The vehicular homicide charge is serious but defensible," he said. "Georgia courts have recognized sleep deprivation as a form of impairment in a number of cases. We have your medical records, the insomnia, the trazodone prescription, the prior sleep aid attempts. We have no alcohol, no drugs, no phone use at time of impact. The evidence supports genuine impairment." "What's the risk?" I asked. He paused. "The risk is the relationship between you and the victim." I looked at him. "Once it becomes known, and it will become known, that the woman you struck was involved with your husband, the narrative shifts. Prosecutors will argue you knew. They will argue the drive wasn't insomnia. They will argue it was a plan." "I didn't know she drove that road," I said. "I didn't even know what kind of a car she drove. I didn't know where she lived exactly. I believe you, Stephen said. But belief isn't evidence. Evidence is evidence. And right now, the evidence of your prior knowledge of the affair creates a motive that a jury will struggle to look past. He was right. I knew he was right before he finished the sentence. The civil suit came 14 days after the accident. Denise Farrow had a family. A mother, Brenda, 67 years old, retired teacher, lived in Macon. A brother, Marcus, 39, electrician in Marietta. No children of her own. She had been, by every account I heard in the months that followed, a kind and capable woman who had made a terrible choice in loving a married man and had paid for it with her life. I want to say that clearly because it matters to me that I say it. Denise Farrow didn't deserve what happened to her. Not from Richard, not from me, not from any of it. Brenda and Marcus Farrow retained a civil litigation attorney named David Osei, a partner at a firm in downtown Atlanta with a reputation for wrongful death cases. They had standing to sue me. Clear, ambiguous standing. Under Georgia law, the family of a person killed through another's negligence has the right to seek compensatory damages for medical expenses, funeral costs, lost future earnings, and the non-economic damages of grief and loss. With criminal negligence as the standard, and the DA's own filing established that standard, their case was strong from day one. I didn't contest the civil suit. Stephen advised me that fighting it will look punitive to a criminal jury, and that a settlement, while financially painful, was the smarter strategic choice. I agreed. I felt, honestly, that Brenda and Marcus Farrow were owed something from me, regardless of the circumstances. My car, my hands on the wheel, my failure to stay home that night. But here is where the legal missionary took on its own terrible momentum. In a civil wrongful death case, the discovery process is expensive. Both sides can depose witnesses, subpoena records, demand documentation. Osei's team was thorough. They subpoenaed my financial records, my phone records, my medical records, all standard. They also subpoenaed Richard's records. I don't think they initially knew about the affair. I think they were casting a wide net, looking for anything that might establish a pattern of behavior, a prior connection to the victim, evidence that the crash was not accidental. What they found when Richard's bank records and phone records were produced in discovery was more than they were looking for. The deposition was on a February morning, 4 months after the accident. I sat across a conference table from David Osei and answered questions for 3 hours. Stephen was beside me. A court reporter was at the end of the table. Richard's attorney, a man named Gerald Hutchins, whom Richard had retained separately, which told me everything I needed to know about where things were going, sat against the wall and observed. The first time Osei mentioned Denise Farrow's name in the deposition, the air in the room changed. Mrs. Calloway, were you aware prior to the accident that your husband, Richard Calloway, had a personal relationship with Denise Farrow? Stephen touched my arm. You can answer. Yes, I said. I became aware approximately 3 weeks before the accident. How did you become aware? I described the dry cleaner, the receipt, the laptop. And you didn't confront your husband at the time? No. Why not? I thought about that question for a moment. I was trying to understand what I was looking at before I said anything. In the 3 weeks between discovering the relationship and the night of the accident, did you attempt to locate Miss Farrow, visit her residence, follow her, make contact in any way? No. Did you know what vehicle she drove? No. Did you know her daily route or schedule? No. Did you discuss Miss Farrow with your husband during those 3 weeks? No. Did you discuss Miss Farrow with anyone during those 3 weeks? No. Osei looked at his notes. Then he looked at me with the particular expression of an attorney who is about to lay something on the table. He slid a photograph across, a hotel receipt, Richard's credit card, a Saturday night 14 months prior, when Richard had told me he was at a cardiology conference in Charlotte. Are you familiar with this document? No. Were you aware your husband maintained a reservation at this hotel on a monthly basis for approximately 4 years? I looked at Stephen. Stephen looked at the document. My client wasn't aware of this prior to discovery, he said. I understand, Osei said. Mrs. Calloway, were you aware that your husband had purchased a condominium in Sandy Springs in 2019, titled under an LLC named Whitmore Property Holdings? The room was very quiet. No, I said. Were you aware of the existence of Whitmore Property Holdings? No. Were you aware that your husband had maintained a secondary bank account at a credit union in Decatur, into which he deposited approximately $4,000 per month beginning in 2018? I looked at my hands on the table. No, I said. I was not aware of any of that. I want to tell you what it is like to discover the full picture of a deception in a law office in front of strangers in real time. I had known about Denise Farrow for 3 weeks before the accident. I'd known there was a woman, a relationship, a betrayal. What I had not known, what the discovery process now revealed, document by document, receipt by receipt, account record by account record, was the infrastructure of it, the deliberateness, the years of careful construction. The condo in Sandy Springs was titled under an LLC to conceal ownership. Richard had been paying the mortgage since 2019, $6,000 a month. He had furnished it. The records showed purchases at Restoration Hardware, a mattress retailer, furniture shops. He had bought her a car, a silver Honda Civic, leased under the LLC. I registered that last detail with a specific, nauseating clarity. The car she died in was bought by my husband. There was more. A life insurance policy on Denise Farrow, which Richard listed as beneficiary, taken out in 2020 under a false representation of their relationship. The insurance company's attorney entered that into the record separately, in a letter that landed like a stone dropped from a great height. $4,000 a month for 6 years, a condo, a car, a life insurance policy, fake business trips, hotel receipts, a phone I later learned he kept in his locker at the hospital and charged there. A woman, a full life running alongside mine for 6 years with the precision of a man who had decided that the problem was not the deception, but the possibility of being caught. Every court appearance dismantled something. Every deposition produced another document. The story assembled itself in public, in front of attorneys and court reporters, and, eventually, in front of journalists. Because the media found out. Of course they did. The coverage began in March when a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution filed a public records request on the civil case and the criminal case and put the two together. The story ran on a Sunday. By Monday, it had been picked up nationally. Atlanta surgeon's wife kills mistress in late-night crash. That was the headline. Not exhausted driver caused a fatal accident. Not sleep-deprived woman in tragic crash. The headline was a verdict before any verdict had been rendered, and it spread the way those things spread, amplified and simplified and stripped of every complexity until what remained was a clean, satisfying story. A woman found out about her husband's affair and killed his mistress and called it an accident. The sleep deprivation defense, as the television commentators called it, was described as clever. One legal analyst on a cable news program, a woman who had never met me, who had read a summary of the case on a website, said on camera that the insomnia narrative was almost too convenient given the circumstances. I watched that segment from the living room of my daughter's apartment in Athens, where I had been staying since the house became impossible to go back to. Sophie had a rule that I wasn't allowed to watch the news after 9 p.m. A rule she enforced with the seriousness of a person who understood exactly what it was doing to me. I watched it anyway. I watched all of it. I couldn't stop. The comments were worse than the coverage. I know you're not supposed to read comments. Sophie told me not to read them. I read them, thousands of them, on the AJC piece, on the TV station's Facebook page, on Reddit threads I had no business being on at 2 in the morning. Everyone's theory sounded very confident. She knew. She planned it. The sleepness story is a lie. Women like her don't go to jail long enough. She should get the chair. Women like her. I spent a long time thinking about that phrase. What kind of woman they thought I was. What kind of woman they had decided I was. From a headline and a photograph taken outside the courtroom where I was wearing sunglasses because the flash of cameras at 8 in the morning is blinding. And not, as one commentator suggested, because I was hiding my true emotions. The DA's office upgraded the charge in April. Voluntary manslaughter. They had been considering giving the affair the prior knowledge, the circumstances of the drive. They argue I had acted in the heat of passion which under Georgia law can reduce a murder charge, but is still a felony. Stephen fought that framing hard. The drive was 3 weeks after the discovery, not the night of. The heat of passion doctrine requires immediate provocation, not delayed response. What they filed instead was murder in the second degree, not first degree. They didn't have premeditation they could prove. But the second degree murder in Georgia requires only that the defendant acted with a depraved indifference to human life, that she consciously disregarded a substantial risk. Their argument that I knew I was severely impaired, that I chose to drive anyway, that my choice constituted a depraved indifference to whoever I might encounter on those roads. And given that the victim was specifically a woman I had reason to target, they argued the conscious disregard wasn't accidental at all. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't frightened. I was frightened in the specific airless way that comes from understanding that the system processing you is very large and very certain, and that your truth is only one version of the story. And versions compete. Stephen worked every angle. We had my medical records. We had the trazodone prescription. We had a testimony from Dr. Parrish about the documented insomnia. We had accident reconstruction experts who testified that the crash was consistent with a microsleep event, the absence of braking, the straight line trajectory into the intersection. The fact that I hadn't swerved. We had no evidence of prior surveillance of Denise Farreau, no search history for her address or her route, no communication with her or about her to anyone. What we did not have, ultimately, was a way to undo the story. And the story was very good. It was the kind of story that makes sense, that follows a logic people recognize, that satisfies something in the way pure tragedy never quite does. The wronged wife, the dead mistress, the midnight drive. Richard testified in April. I want to be careful here because I've been told by people I trust that anger makes me less credible. And I have worked very hard in this telling to stay on the right side of that line. So I will tell you what happened factually, and I will try to leave the rage out of it, though the rage is there, and it will always be there. Banked and permanent, and I know it now the way you know a scar. Richard was called by the prosecution. He sat in the witness chair in a dark suit, and he looked composed in the way that surgeons are composed. By training, and I believe by a fundamental separation from consequence that allows a person to hold an open human heart and not feel their own stopping. The prosecutor, a woman named Renee Blackwood, who was very good at her job, walked him through the affair, the duration, the condo, the finances, the burner phone. Richard confirmed all of it calmly, with the language of a man who has decided that transparency about one set of facts is the best strategy for protecting a larger interest. He answered each question fully and without apparent discomfort, and I sat at the defense table 12 feet away and watched my husband of 24 years describe the whole picture of his deception to a courtroom and a jury and through the press gallery to the country. Then Blackwood asked him about me. Dr. Calloway, in your knowledge of your wife, her temperament, her character, her behavior in the weeks leading up to the accident, Did you observe anything that concerned you? Gerald Hutchins, Richard's attorney, didn't object. He had advised Richard to answer. I understood in that moment that they had made a calculation, that Richard's cooperation with the prosecution was the price of his own insulation from whatever legal exposure the life insurance policy and the financial concealment might otherwise have created. He was buying his freedom with mine. That is not speculation. Stephen confirmed as much later in terms that were professional and matter-of-fact, and which I haven't been matter-of-fact about since. Richard said, I was concerned, yes. Can you describe your concerns? Mindy had been different in the weeks before the accident. Withdrawal. She wasn't sleeping. She seemed angry, though she wouldn't discuss it. I was worried she had found out about Denise. Did you ask her directly? No. I'm not proud of this. I was afraid of the conversation. In your assessment of your wife's character, Dr. Calloway, based on 24 years of marriage, would you describe her as someone capable of deliberate harm? I heard Sophie make a sound beside me, not a word, just a sound. Stephen was on his feet. Objection. Calls for speculation. The judge sustained it, but it didn't matter. The jury had heard the question. Questions once asked in front of juries do not unask themselves. Richard had delivered what the prosecution needed, not an answer, but an implication sitting in the air of that courtroom for the jury to breathe. He left the stand without looking at me. He walked down the center aisle of the courtroom in his dark suit, and he pushed open the door, and he was gone. And I sat there and I felt something that I don't have a clean name for. Something beyond anger and beyond grief. Something that lives in the territory past both of those. In the place where a person goes when they've finally understood the true dimensions of what was done to them. He had deceased me for 6 years. He had built an entire parallel life with another woman. He had allowed that woman to be buried while I sat in a jail cell facing murder charges. And when given the opportunity to stand in a courtroom and tell the truth about who I was, the woman he had known for 25 years, the woman who had raised his children and sat by his mother's bed when she was dying and held this family together through every absence and every late night and every missed dinner. He had chosen instead to offer my character up as a question mark. That was the second betrayal, bigger than the first, bigger than Denise Farrow, bigger than the condo and the car and the 6 years of lies. Because the first betrayal was about desire, and desire is at least human. This one was about survival, only his survival. I'm currently serving 4 years, eligible for parole in 20 months. Richard filed for divorce 6 months after the verdict. I signed the papers. The Buckhead house was sold. My share went into account Sophie manages. I haven't spoken to Richard directly since the day of the verdict. When he passed me in the courtroom hallway and said my name, just my name, Mindy, once, and I looked at him and said nothing and kept walking. That's the story. All of it. As honestly as I know how to tell it. Stay safe out there. And please, pay attention to what people show you when there's nothing left to protect.